This is Henry Washington, and you're listening to the Average Joe Finances Podcast.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like and subscribe buttons. If you're listening to our podcast, go leave us a 5-star review. All of our links can be found in the video description or show notes below. Hey, welcome back to the Average Joe Finances Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Cavagioni, and today's guest is Doug Lynam. And Doug, looking into your background and the small conversation we had before I hit the record button, I am super excited to talk to you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's really an honor to be here and to chat with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the honor is mine here. I want to start this off the same way I start every podcast episode, and we want to know your story. So if you could, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, share your story? Who is Doug Lynam?
Wow, it's a big question. I'll try to keep it short and to the point. Cliff Note version, I grew up in a somewhat affluent family. My father was the executive for an oil company, and my parents divorced when I was pretty young, and they about 8 or so. And what happened in my family is it felt like money got weaponized. And if I needed something, I'd ask my mom. She'd say, go ask your dad. He's got all the money. Ask my dad. He says, I give your mom all my money. And so it felt like they were playing financial chicken all the time. And so and my dad had his issues. He's a good guy, loving, kind in many ways, but he had what I call some serious money monsters. And that kind of created in me this sort of visceral reaction against the world of finance and money. I had this idea that when St. Paul says that the love of money is the root of all evil, I took it a little too seriously, and I figured the best way to, if loving money is bad, then hating money is the way to go. And so, anyway, went off to college, studied philosophy, mathematics, all these good things. And then I was still trying to win my dad's approval. So I went off and joined the Marine Corps and went to officer candidate at school with the Marines. And I graduated at the top of my class from OCS. But then that didn't really get the approval I was looking for. So I was looking for a higher calling and then a way to really piss my parents off. So I then turned down my commission in the Marines and went and joined a monastery and became a Benedictine monk. Took a vow of poverty for 20 years and did that and had a lot of wild experiences and learned that being poor was pretty shitty, not a great way to live, and had to come to some sort of more middle ground. I realized Mark Twain, what he humorously said, that it's the lack of money that's the root of all evil. And that's probably where I fall in more these days. But at one point early on in my 20 years in the monastery, our community went bankrupt because we all hated money. And I guess we took the vow of poverty a little too seriously. So someone had to dig us out of that hole. And for various reasons, that fell onto my shoulders. And so I went to a bookstore and grabbed every book on finance I could get and started reading them diligently. And it worked. It took about 2 or 3 years to really pull us out of that hole, but I got good at managing money, started helping monastery guests with their problems, and realized that a lot of the spiritual problems that people were coming to me with were actually money problems in disguise. That if we could solve their money issues, like 80% of their life stress would just go away. Like what I now know is that money problems, your personal financial sense of security or well-being has a bigger impact on your emotional health than the combination of your relationship stability, your job, and your friendships and community. Like those things are all important, but if your financial life really isn't in place, you're at risk for all kinds of terrible things that you don't want. So we now know that your socioeconomic status is the best predictor of mortality, because if you're poor, you get hit with a whole lot of stuff that you don't want, like obesity, drug addiction, domestic violence, abuse, injury, early death, name the list. It all gets worse the poorer you are. So it really became part of my gift to others was to help them with their money problems. And then after 20 years in the monastery, I burnt out on that, stopped growing. Long story short, I was in a teaching order. So in the monastery, I was teaching. I was the head of a mathematics department at a private school. And I felt like economics and personal finance were really important things that kids weren't being taught. So I started offering those courses as electives and enjoyed it. And one day for a class project, I opened up the school retirement plan to show the kids how it worked and realized it was an absolute train wreck. There was just no fiduciary oversight. There were poor funds, bad fees, all the things that, Anyway, so I went looking for a better company that could do a better job, and I couldn't find one. I realized it was actually a national epidemic. And so I launched and I realized this was a $1 billion pain point. If someone could build a better mousetrap, you could make a lot of money. And so that's what I did. I launched my own investment advisory firm from inside a monastery, which is just bizarre. And then left the monastery in 2016. And then I took my tiny little company and I merged it with a larger firm here in Santa Fe. And then grew that to a pretty substantial portfolio, pulled in over $100 million in assets. And one of the cool things is right when I launched my company, this is just a stroke of luck, the New York Times did a 6-part expose on the problem of teacher retirement plans. Every month they did this big splashy piece. And this was just exactly the thing that I was discovering. So I reached out to the New York Times on Facebook and just said, hey guys, love these articles, blah, blah, blah. Here's what I'm doing. They got excited about that. They flew a reporter out to Santa Fe. They did a big piece on me in the New York Times, and that went viral. It hit the front page of the business section. That really launched my career. I got a 2-book deal from HarperCollins, and then now I'm finishing up this. My first book was called From Monk to Money Manager, Former Monk's Financial Guide to Becoming a Little Bit Wealthy and Why That's Okay. And that's really a how-to book of just nuts and bolts of personal finance. How do you do it, right? All the basics. And then my new book is called Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. And it's really a why do book. Why do we do stupid things with our money? What are the psychological quirks that we all have based on our personality that hold us back from really achieving financial security and financial freedom?
Yeah, that right there is some background. And when I read your bio and looking into your story, and then just the conversation we had before, and now hearing the full story, it's wow. 20 years in a monastery. And then while you were there, had to figure out how to get them out of bankruptcy. And especially after taking like an oath of poverty. So that must have been pretty conflicting for you and for everyone else. And actually, I want to ask you about that. So was that conflicting in how you were able to get them out of the financial problems that they were having? Like, what kind of challenges did you face, I guess, morally, right, when it came to being able to get them out of bankruptcy?
I'll just give you one anecdote about one of the brothers who I nicknamed him Brother Pius. And Brother Pius was someone who refused to touch money of any kind, no cash, no credit cards, no debit cards, thinking that touching money was somehow going to be spiritually tainted soul in some weird way and would propel him forward on his spiritual path. And what I discovered is it actually gave him a superiority complex and gave him kind of this looking down his nose at me and everything I was doing to try to pay the bills so that when he had a medical issue, we could pay for it, things like that, or put food on the table. And so there was some resentment I got from some of the other brothers that made it over time. We never fully resolved, and was one of the reasons why I ended up leaving, because I just never felt like they had money monsters that I couldn't tame. Like which is what led into this book, is I didn't understand why these very bright, very intelligent, very kind, very loving, very smart, generous people couldn't get their money back together. What was the emotional blocks in them and in me? Is first and foremost, what was it in me that was so resistant initially? And how do you get over these things so that you can really have a sustainable and robust financial life? So it was a real struggle. I can't say I was ever super successful at resolving all the issues internally, but I think I resolved them for myself, and I can help other people do the same.
Okay, that's fair. So let me just ask you, Doug, what is a money monster?
Okay, so a money monster is one of the unhealthy ways that we can relate to our personal finances. And so I'm using this system called the Enneagram, which you may or may not have heard of, but it's a personality typology system. And Enneagram means 9 in Greek, and gram means drawn. So it's just 9 things drawn. It's these 9 archetypal patterns of personality. And what we now know from the neurobiology and the childhood developmental psychology is that there's only so many ways to design an ego. And the Enneagram tells you the rough shape and structure of your ego, how it forms through your childhood defense mechanisms. It's sort of like a car metaphor. Like you drive a unique car, yours is a unique year, make, and model, and it's different from every car on the road. And there's an infinite variety of cars that are possible. There's only so many models or categories of cars. Like you can have SUVs and compact cars or family sedans, that every car is going to fall into some broad general category. And otherwise, it's not a car. It's not roadworthy. It doesn't function on the road. And so your ego follows these same rules. There's some rules. So the physics of consciousness. It's like, how does a consciousness or an ego develop in an individuated human being? And that process of individuating in childhood or establishing your unique identity in the world is what the Enneagram tells you. And it tells you what those ego defense mechanisms are that you have. And it creates these 9 archetypes. So that's the foundational layer of the book. And then I'm layering on top of that what I call the attachment theory of money, which is based on the attachment theory of relationships, if anybody's familiar with that. But just a quick overview, what it says is that there's the attachment theory of money this is my new idea, that there are 2 core unhealthy ways that we can relate to money. One is to be anxiously attached to it, be overly clingy, overly obsessed about it. Like Ebenezer Scrooge would be a kind of classic example of that in one. And then you could be avoidant of money, which was my money monster. Like we reject it. And that was what I saw in the monastery, pushing it away. It brings up all kinds of fear and anxiety or shame or whatever it is, depending on your Enneagram type. And so that gives you 2 money monsters that you can have for each of the 9 Enneagram archetypes of personality. And so then you can be anxious in one area of your finances or avoidant in another. So I have what I call the 4 pillars of finance, and that's earning, saving, investing, and giving. You can be what I call the jumbled style as well. You could be anxious in one of those 4 areas or avoidant in another. So it's about, the book really explores your unique personality type and then what your unique money monsters might be and how they show up in these different arenas of your financial life.
I love that. I have 4 pillars too when it comes to building wealth or really just doing anything successful in life. So I love that you have these core pillars that you fall back on and looking at them, earning, saving, investing, and giving, and the importance behind each one of them. And actually, that's probably the next thing I want to ask you. Can you tell me, why is it so important to have those 4 pillars to be, I guess, financially successful or just to be just in a better place with your money?
Sure. It follows sequentially. Earning comes first, right? You got to have income, and hopefully that's going up as you level up in your career, your business, right? And then there's saving. So if you spend everything you have, you'll always be broke. And my dad was a pretty good example of this. He was a high-powered executive, but he was really concerned about status symbols and big cars and flashy house and all this stuff. And it's like he was essentially spending maybe more even than his high income would justify. And so he ended up his life with far less resources than he probably should have. He lost quite a bit of his money over the course of his life and really had some real financial struggles near the end. So you have to save, right? You got to save more than you spend, hopefully significant more than you save more than you earn. Sorry, let me back that up. So it's earning, save more than you earn, and then you have to invest. So you obviously want to start with cash reserves, make sure you have a buffer for emergency funds and things like that. And then once those things are covered, you need to start investing for your long-term future and harnessing the power of compound growth, whether it's through the stock market or whether I know you're really into real estate. That could be a great path for people as well. Whatever your investment is, it's going to generate passive income for you over time. And then the final piece is giving. Is okay, once you've established your financial security, you've mastered those first 3 pillars, what are you doing to love and serve the broken world around you? So it isn't just about me and being selfish, greedy, so and so. Okay, this money is now a tool, and it's the most powerful tool we have for good in the world. Money is how we get stuff done. And what I realized in the monastery is if you don't have any money, you don't have any power, and you don't have the ability to affect change. And now if you can amass a significant amount of wealth, you have this great superhero power and your superhero utility tool belt to go out there and fix the crack in the world that you were born to heal. And I think that's what we're all called to ultimately. Whatever your spiritual tradition is, doesn't matter. Whatever it is, your sense of the sacred or the divine is, I think we're all called to love and serve each other and serve the world in some way. And money is going to be the tool that's going to help you do that.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. I love that. All right, Doug. So you mentioned something earlier, the Enneagram model that you follow, right? And I know that you said it comes with 9 archetypes, right? Of where you would fall into. So how does whatever type you fall into, whatever category you fall into, what does that say about where somebody stands when it comes to their finances and things like that?
It's unique for each type. So you have to
Sure.
go deep into each one of them. So it's not an easy question to answer. We probably don't have time to go through all the 9 types. But I'll just tell you about mine. Maybe that we just start there, and that
Okay.
can give you a little sense of how it works. So the way the Enneagram works is when you're born, or think about your time in the womb, right? What was that experience like? And my hypothesis, my sort of axiomatic assumption is that you're starting in unconscious unity with everything you can experience. Right? So you don't have a very limited sense of reality, but you're at one with all of it. And then you grow and develop, and then you get born, and surprise, you find out there's more to reality than to you. And you need to individuate. You need to establish a boundary between what's me and what's not me. And that's your ego. Okay. But initially, what happens when you're born, there's a physical umbilical cord that gets cut between you and your mother. Then there's this psychological umbilical cord that forms. So you have this egoic codependency on your caregivers for the first 0 to 10 years of your life. 0 to 7 is where most of this happens. But this psychological umbilical cord allows your parents to do much of the navigating of reality for you. But over time, that psychological umbilical cord needs to be cut. And it can only be cut with the sharpest of negative emotions, because positive emotions will reinforce your connection to your caregivers. So how that psychological umbilical cord got cut determines what your Enneagram type is. And there's only 3 core negative emotions in the mammalian brain. So in the limbic system of the brain back here in the lower brainstem, there's just 3 main negative circuitries, and that's anger, sadness, and fear. And so your Enneagram type is almost like a hex code. It's like, think of a color wheel. Like if each of those was a color and we put these 9 types on a color wheel, your Enneagram type is where did you land on that color wheel? And one color is going to be more dominant than the other 3. So more anger, more sadness, or more fear. And so for me, I got mine cut by sadness. And then there's these 3 negative emotions, but there's 3 ways to process that emotion. You can internalize it, kind of like giving yourself an emotional wedgie. You can externalize it, which is like having a food fight with the world, or you can have both. So that's why there's 9 types. There's 3 core negative emotions, 3 ways to process it internally, externally, or both, and boom, that gives you your 9 types. Okay, does that track so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's just talk about mine. I'm a type 3. And so I fall into the sadness triad, or sometimes called the shame triad. And what that means is I have this internalized sadness about, or shame or grief about how I perceive myself. And I have this externalized sadness or shame about how I think others perceive me. And this stereophonic sort of sadness creates my greatest fear. And we all have this unconscious greatest fear. And I call it your sacred wound. I call this cutting of the psychological umbilical cord your sacred wound. And so for me, that sacred wound creates my greatest fear of being worthless. So I have this inner sense of lack of self-esteem or lack of validation that I'm always looking for. So that creates my Enneagram type, which is called the achiever, or I use car metaphors. I call it the race car. So type 3s are always gunning for the next achievement. We always want to cross the finish line first, run the marathon, start the company, whatever. We're looking for these external validations of success in order to assuage this inner sense of emptiness that we have inside of our soul. And so for me, that's always about, look at me. And so it then creates your shadow, what we call your Jungian shadow structure. There's several steps to it, which I could walk you through. But essentially, then what that creates are my 2 money monsters, which is going to be, I call them the barrier and the blinger. What that means is the barrier is the 3 who they have so much shame or grief or anxiety around money that they don't want to look at it. So they bury their heads in the sand like an ostrich and just hope will all go away because they don't like that shame or sadness is triggering inside themselves. Or you can be what I call the flinger. And so the flinger type 3 is the one who might earn a lot of money, but they spend it all on status symbols. So they're flinging money at the fancy car. This is my dad. My dad and I are both the same Enneagram type, which is interesting, but I was the barrier and he was the blinger. And it's okay, what's all that? And so it was really interesting to see that dichotomy, but the 3s who's the blinger is going to be struggle with the investing and the giving part because they're so overextending themselves financially to have the status symbols rather than the financial security that investing that money or putting it to work would give them. So then there's a whole path to overcome that and get to your money, what I call your money master. And that, for the three, I call it the builder. So the builder is the three who learns to use master the four pillars of finance, and then uses that wealth to build something in love and service to a suffering world.
Okay, awesome. So out of those three that you described in the achiever category, is there a way to get to from one to the other? The way that you described it, I feel like you may have started off in the barrier and then eventually became the builder, right? Where your father was stuck in the blinger section and just stayed there.
You got it.
Does that sound right?
Exactly right. You nailed it.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to take one of these tests probably after this interview and see where I fall in at.
There's a lot of free ones out there, and they're mostly worthless. So the one that I like, it's a little expensive. It's called the IEQ9 Integrative Enneagram Test. And I have my own little link to that if I could put that in the show notes. And I get a little kickback every time someone takes it. So that would be helpful.
Awesome.
But it's good. It's a good test. It will really help you figure out what your Enneagram type is. And then if you want to figure out your money monsters, then of course, check out my book, Taming Your Money Monster.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. When does that come out, by the way?
July 8th, and pre-orders are available on Amazon.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, we're definitely going to have that in the show notes and anything else that we need to get in there for people that want to find that info, but we'll get to that part later. Okay, so it's called the 1EQ9. Okay, and then we'll get that. IEQ9. IEQ9. The way I write my notes, ones and I's look very similar. There we go. Okay, awesome. Yeah, this is very interesting because the way that you're combining psychology into money habits and how they impact each other, I think can be very helpful to some people that might not understand what their underlying issue is that's causing them to make poor decisions when it comes to their finances. I think this is something that, and if you're in a specific Enneagram type and you can actually change some of those behaviors, and you're still going to be that type, right? But you could change some of those behaviors to be a better version that is going to be successful with their finances. That is impactful. And I think a lot of times I've had people come on and we talk about money. And one of the things that I talk about is your relationship with money, right? And is it a healthy relationship? Is it a toxic relationship? Like, how do you view money? Do you even have a relationship with it? Or is it just a tool, right? Because I think it is a tool, but it's one of those tools that you can actually have a relationship with and figure out how to use it to your benefit. A lot of times people have very poor relationships with money because they look at it from a different perspective. An example would be when you were in the monastery, right? Your relationship with money was very poor. You didn't like it. You didn't want any of it. And it was like, get away from me. But I think, man, you have such a cool story, Doug. 20 years as a monk. And then now what you're doing right now are you actually a financial advisor, like licensed or?
I'm still licensed, but I exited from my investment advisory business last year and took a buyout so I could go work on this book. And now I'm a keynote speaker, author, and workshop facilitator.
Yeah, no. So now you're living the dream right now, right? You're getting to do something that you absolutely love and help so many people in the process of doing it. And that's one of those things, like I spoke at conferences, and that's one of the things I enjoyed the most, is because I feel like the impact you can make, man, it's part of that giving pillar that you say, right? Because you're giving back, and not necessarily just giving money, you're giving an education that is going to help people make more money and be more financially responsible. And if that's not a fiduciary responsibility for anyone to claim that they have, that is one right there for sure. So I absolutely love that, Doug. And what I'd like to do now is, because, your story was amazing. I want to dig a little bit into how you are under a little bit of pressure with how we ask these same 4 questions that everybody that comes on the show. It's called the final round. And if you're ready to go, we can get those questions going.
Yeah, fire away.
Okay, awesome. So Doug, obviously there's been a lot of change in your life from the time you graduated and finished OCS to becoming a monk, to becoming a financial advisor, to now what you're doing as a keynote speaker and helping people understand the psychology behind money and what Enneagram type they are and how that all comes together. There's a lot of experience compacted into that. And So I want to ask you, so the first question in the final round is, throughout your life, what is the biggest mistake you've ever made when it comes to your finances or business?
Outsourcing my responsibility. Thinking somebody else is going to care more about my
You said
money than I
outsourcing.
do. Outsourcing it.
Wow.
Like
Okay.
like the barrier. That was my thing. Like when I was in the monastery, I was like, I'll just trust that these guys who are older and wiser and have more degrees, that they know what they're doing. And because I didn't, and I was like, I'll just trust that you guys have got this sorted out. And guess what? Whatever I've learned is that you can outsource authority, but not responsibility. So you can delegate tasks, but you're the ultimate one who's responsible for all your finances. It's the buck stops here. It's so simple. It's obvious, but it was a hard lesson for me to learn, to really have that attention to detail to my finances and really have a healthy relationship with it and want to engage with it on a regular and daily basis.
Okay. No, that's fair. A lot of times I see people talk about one of the mistakes is that they made is that they didn't outsource certain things, but you're talking about outsourcing your actual, how you feel about money, right? And taking that on yourself, because no one's going to manage your money better than yourself, because it's your money, right? You're the one who actually cares about it the most. If you trust someone else to do it, which I have a financial advisor too with one of my accounts, but I also have things that I do on my own. So I think I like to be well-rounded with what I do, but I totally get what you're saying. 100%.
I'm all for financial. I was an financial investment advisor. So I'm all for investment advisors, CPAs, account. You need a team, right? You need to outsource and delegate, especially when you get to a certain level. But ultimately, you need to be looking over your statements that your investment advisor is sending you and making sure that
100%.
You aren't just blindly, you're opening whatever they send you, you're checking their performance, you're checking to make sure they're doing their job. So it's like hiring a plumber, right? You can hire a plumber to fix your house, but you still want to check to make sure they did a good job at the end of the day. And
you don't want to wait for them to
just
leave and then go flush the toilet and it explodes.
Exactly.
Awesome. No, I love that, Doug. Awesome. Okay. This next question kind of ties into the last, and that is, what is something that you've learned that you wish you knew when you first started out?
Wow. Every author,
that question probably goes really deep for you.
It does. And I think every author writes to themselves. And both of my books, I really wrote them to my younger self. It was like, this is all the stuff that I didn't know that I wish I'd learned early on, or someone would have taught me. Like the basics of finance is the first book. The first book is the how-tos. And the second book is the why-dos. And so I think it's all there, but I'm not quite sure what more to say beyond that, because both those books are pretty extensive.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think if a writer is not writing to themselves, or if an author is not writing to themselves, they're not really being genuine, especially when it comes to anything involving self-help. I'd prefer to understand the point of view of someone that's lived it versus someone that just said, oh yeah, I learned about this, I'm going to write a book about it. You know what I'm saying? So the fact that you've lived it and you're taking your personal experience and putting that into words that's going to help other people, that to me is profound.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Doug, next question is, do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to someone that is just getting started today?
First of all, become financially literate. Number one, and always be a lifelong learner. Like never stop learning. That's going to be your number one superpower in your journey. So listening to podcasts like this and reading books like mine, whatever it is, you got to keep learning. And especially, I think you need to learn about the power of compound growth. That's the thing that is the key to all wealth over time. However you want to engage in investing, you need to understand the long-term power of compound interest and how that's going to play out in your financial life over time. And if you can, the earlier you start, the easier it is to build wealth. Like because it grows exponentially. So the longer your time horizon to invest, the more money you're going to have over time. And if you try to wait to do this until you're in your 40s or 50s, you've already missed most of the growth opportunity that you're going to have in your life, because it's like that an exponential, this curve that just exponentially shoots up over time. And if you really understand how to master that skill and that tool, you're going to be setting yourself on a path to real financial freedom.
I love it. I love it. All right, Doug. So those were the three tougher questions, right? This last one's just an opinion-based question. And I will preface it with, besides your own, do you have a favorite business, investing, or real estate related book or podcast, or both?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about that. So one of my favorite books that really helped me out a lot, it's a book called Naked Economics by a guy named Charles Whelan. And it's really a high level, like I'm a big systems thinker kind of guy. I like big ideas. And he really does a great job of teaching you how economics works on a macro level. And he taught me to love capitalism. Like I was this kind of, for lack of a better word, bleeding heart liberal, and I still lean that way in many ways, but it had this real anti-capitalistic worldview and corporations are evil, all that blah, blah, blah BS, right? Is to really understand that capitalism is the best of all the bad systems we have. That in giving people free will to make their own decisions, that a consumer-driven economy is really the best path to long-term prosperity, health, and happiness for our planet. And that was a mind that blew my mind, right? To really appreciate what a miracle is that our economic system is, despite its many flaws. Like not trying to gloss them over, but to see, hey, I think this modern movement, particularly in young people, who thinks that all capitalism is bad, all money, the whole world of finance is evil. Wait a minute. Okay, let's dial it back and let's look at the history and let's look at the other options. And I think you'll see that it's really quite beautiful in so many ways. Naked Economics is my first book. That's really the macro level of how systems work on the large scale. And then the second book I would say is a book called Predictably Irrational. That's by a guy named Dan Ariely. And this really opened my mind to behavioral finance. So like how to think about money in terms of it's a funny, quirky book, but it's about exploring the hidden forces that shape our financial decisions. And to really got me excited about thinking about how our brains glitch out when we deal with money in predictable ways and cause us to make really silly and stupid mistakes. And that, of course, led into my second, over many decades, that, of course, led into my fascination with the Enneagram and how that applied to behavioral finance.
It's funny how you say how our brain glitches, right? Because yeah, I see that happen to me sometimes too. If I'm out shopping with my wife or something and I see something shiny, it's like sometimes you make a decision in a vacuum that you look back at and you're like, maybe I shouldn't have bought that. And maybe that was not the best purchase for me to make at that time. Right. So yeah, no, totally understand that. Okay. Hey, really appreciate that. That is it for the final round, Doug. Pat yourself on the back. You made it through. But now I do have another question I want to ask you. And this is the most important question I'm going to ask you throughout this entire show, because for my listeners right now, they've been listening or watching this and they're like, I really like Doug's point of view. I really like how he has combined psychology with financial decision-making and the Enneagram system. And I want to learn more about that. I want to learn more about what Doug does, or I want to get his book. So Doug, where can people find more information about you? Do you have a website you could share with us? Any social medias we can follow? And where can we get your book? I know we can pre-order the second book on Amazon. I'm going to assume your first book's on Amazon too.
Correct. Yes. So the one-stop shop for all of that is going to be my website, which is my name, DougLynam.com, DougLynam.com. And all my social media handles are the same, just my name at Doug Lynam. You can find me on Yahoo, or Yahoo, the screen behind you. You've got your Yahoo, article behind you. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Substack, and and LinkedIn. Those would be your best bets.
You got me excited when you said there was a Yahoo behind me. I haven't had one of those in years. I had to look real quick. I was like, where's the Yahoo?
Yahoo, sorry.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Hey, we're going to make sure we have all of those in the show notes so it's easy for people to find you and check things out. We'll get that IEQ9 link in there as well. So for my listeners, you guys know the drill. If you're driving right now, please don't try to go to any of these links. Wait till you're in a safe place, because I know a lot of you like to listen to this podcast on your commute, and I really appreciate that, but keep yourself safe. So Doug, to close things out, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Final thoughts? Buy my book, please. Review it. Put a review up if you like it.
Awesome.
My closing thought. It was a 5-year project, and I think I'm really excited about it. I think people are going to enjoy it.
Okay. No, definitely. All right, Doug. Hey, I appreciate that. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us on the show today. Your perspective was pretty eye-opening even for me. I've been doing this for a little while, and I definitely want to take that test and see what category I fall into and maybe better understand some of the decisions I make. So I think that second book is going to help me out. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting it. And I also want to say thank you to all of our listeners for joining me and our special guest, Doug Lynam, on the Average Joe Finances podcast today. go leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you liked about today's specific episode with Doug. Aloha from Hawaii, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.